Great to have you guys. Let me pray. Father, grateful for another night where we get to hang out together, and we're thankful for the season, December, where we remember the birth of Christ. And I pray that you would help us to think and expand our intellect a little bit as we think about this story, but also draw us closer to you from it as we use our minds. Help us to use our hearts too. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, it's Christmas, so I thought we'd do some Christmas stuff. Why not? And I'm looking and seeing how many people were here last year. I'm not going to do the same stuff, don't worry. But a lot of people weren't. Like most of you all were not here last year for Christmas. Huh. We did Revelation 12 last year, so some of you might remember that for our Christmas story, I think. Didn't we?
Yes. You went ahead and picked it up in our Revelation class.
Yeah.
For the Christmas story.
Yeah. And we did Matthew the year before. So we talked about Matthew 1 and 2. So I want to just walk through. Maybe this will be more devotional than it will be intellectual. Might make some of you happy and others of you not happy, but you can have as much discussion as you want in here. And I'll try to ask some questions as I go through it, but it definitely will be not as intellectually pressing as normal. So I'll start with a little story, and then we'll get into the characters and the story and the story itself. So once upon a time, because all good stories start with once upon a time, right? Once upon a time, there lived a good king. His castle was grand and sat atop a large hill overlooking the kingdom. There were problems in the kingdom, but the king was well loved, or at least the idea of a king was well loved. There was a statue in the common area of the king in his prime, but it had been many years since then. Many years since anyone had even seen the king. Some wondered secretly if the king had not died many years ago and kingdom was just continuing without a true monarch. But all that changed one day. A day that would be forever remembered. One day the news started to spread. A poster in the town square said it clearly. A new king was coming. A child was to be born who would rule in equity and righteousness and power. Traveling minstrels were singing songs about him, and even kingdoms far away had heard the news. Many were even traveling that they might catch sight of this new king. Then one night, while all were sleeping, they heard it. It was a horn off in the distance. Throughout the night, the horns grew louder. The earth was shaking. People began to move from their beds and make their ways to the streets. Their houses shook. The news was spreading. The king was here. The drawbridge was lowered, the portcullis raised. Heralds from the battlements called to the basilica below what was happening to those inside. Horses, thousands of them, tens of thousands, all decked in illustrious garb. Elephants, carriages for as far as the eye could see. That group over there contained the king of a land some 500 miles away. Over there, a king to the south, a queen in that group, religious leaders from Turkey and Ireland and China. The city was alive. No one was left in their beds despite the darkness of the early morning. But it wasn't really dark anymore. The sky was dark, but the courtyard was bright with a million torches and the joy of a million faces, and more still filed past the gatehouse into the opening that barely contained the crowd already gathered. The noise was deafening as horns played and people sang and cried and screamed out in ecstasy. And then the palace door at the top of the stairs opened. Two men, quick as could be, threw out a plush carpet of red and purple, and ladies threw flowers everywhere. The carpet went down the stairs and onto a platform. The people had to back up, but could barely do so. Then music, softly at first, and then louder and louder, beautiful, inspiring, powerful. They cried again, and they didn't even know why. And then they saw him, the king, even more handsome than his statue. He held the hand of his queen, who couldn't have been more perfect. And in her arms, the child. There was a hush. The people had stopped coming in. There was no more room. The crowd outside the city gates was still as the king descended the stairs and ascended the platform. Then the king took the child in his arms and raised him high. My son is born. After all these years of waiting, the new king. The roar of excitement was deafening. The world was awake. There would be no other conversation taking place for months, years, Centuries. All who spoke would speak of this moment, for nothing else mattered. All right, you have the scene? Okay. That's how I would do it. If there had to be a bad guy in this story, they would be very short-lived. There would be some kind of cunning conspiracy to destroy this child, but gleaming knights would come out and put an end to the plan. Whatever happened with this bad guy or bad guys would be big and monumental and glorious, and would be all around the world. It would be lavish and royal and pomp and circumstance times a billion. That's how I would do it. But the stories that we're going to read about today are very different. All right, so this is just to get us into that mindset of the total, complete opposite story being told, from the one that I would do this to this other story of this girl, a dad in poverty, a manger, a king who wants the child dead, and 2,000 years later, people talking about things at Christmas like, it's not a Christmas tree, it's a holiday tree, things like that, right? It's this, like, none of the stuff from what I was just reading, none of the stuff that I tried to set it up there for. Now, I don't care about whether you say Happy Christmas, Merry Christmas, whether you need holiday trees. None of that makes any difference to me. I don't care if you keep Christ in Christmas. If Christmas has become a holiday that's about presents and Santa, fine, don't care. Let it happen. If it's become commercialized, fine, don't care. Right? It happened to Halloween. Nobody reads the story of Martin Luther before we go out and trick or treat. Right? It's been taken over. Right? And Christmas took over another thing anyway. My point is, I don't care about any of those culture wars kinds of things, but there is something about this day, okay, the day that we pretend, right, the day that we remember, whatever that day was, not December 25th, right, whatever day that was where this child was born, that actually does matter. And that seems to me that it should be a huge celebration. Like, all the pomp and circumstance, all the way that I see it. But the way I see it doesn't seem to matter, right? Whatever God did, however he orchestrated this, is completely opposite. I want to say even that it seems like God is conspiring against all of my plans for how I would do it. He's like, I know the way that everyone's going to expect this to happen, and I got a plan that's going to blow them all away. Like, it's not going to be anything that they want. And it's such a different plan because it's part of the story, right? It's not just this lowly birth, which is what we're going to talk about. That's basically what we're going to talk about, right? This lowly birth. But it's not just the fact that it's a lowly birth. It's because that's part of the entire Heilsgeschichte, right? The whole history of redemption is about this lowly birth, or it's about this humble beginning. It's about what our call is, and it's never to pomp and circumstance. Right? It's never to royal horns blowing and lifted high or anything like that. It's always the reversal of that. And that's what I feel like we still miss as Christians, especially American Christians. So that's the way I wanted to talk about it. So I thought what we do is look at some of these characters as we think through the stories from Matthew 1 and 2 and Luke 1 and 2. Right? We don't have any other real Christmas stories. John doesn't give us a Christmas story. Mark doesn't give us a Christmas story. Revelation 12 gives us kind of a Christmas story, which we'll talk a little bit about. It's really just Matthew and Luke. And by the way, most people, at least Luke, I'm all sure, the academic consensus around Luke is that Luke 1 and 2 are added after the fact, that whoever wrote chapters 3 and forward were not written by the person who wrote 1 and 2. Okay, and you can tell that by the Greek. It's just so different in the way you write, syntax-wise. But you can also tell because it just seems It's this story all by itself. And because John doesn't care about it, Mark doesn't care about it. So, and Luke and Matthew, you know this, right? Luke and Matthew are copies of Mark. That maybe I'll let that sit in for just a second. We don't ever talk about source criticism, but we could, right? So there are two here, just to the academic people, so we don't just stay on the emotional side of things, right? There's these two books. There's lots of different gospels, which we're talking about in our canon stuff, but we have four. One of them we don't call a synoptic. Synoptic are three of them. Synoptic just means same, right? So they're same, and then John is very well. These three are kind of the same because two of them are copies of the other one. Okay, so Mark has written this. This is what academics say. Mark has written this, and then Matthew and Luke have come in and they've taken that and they've added their own perspective on things. So we call this the Markan priority. Okay, a long time ago, people thought it was Matthew that was the main one, but now pretty much everybody's universally agreed that it's Mark is the main one, and maybe some other sources out there that Matthew and Luke are taking from. All right, does that bother anybody? Probably not if you've been in this for a while. All right, that's not the point of what I was trying to do. I just kind of got off track there and thought, hey, they're going to need some academic stuff too. All right, so let's start talking about the characters in the story. So anybody grew up Catholic or have any Catholic connections? Like, yeah, how is Mary seen in the Catholic world? I can see
Holy
you talking,
Mother.
Steve. I can see you talking, but I didn't hear you.
Holy Mother.
Holy Mother. Yeah, right,
Yeah.
Fran. Okay.
The Blessed Mother. Yeah.
The Blessed Mother.
The Holy Mother. Yeah. Have statues of her.
Yeah. Everywhere. In fact, you can't go into a Catholic church, I assume, without something about Mary.
It's not a proper Catholic church.
That's right. Right. Billions of statues all around the world. I mean, she's awesome. She's the queen, right? She's even called. I mean, in fact, she's wearing this crown. She's got 12 stars over her head. Like, churches are named after her for centuries. This isn't even like a modern thing. For a long time, she's the queen of, the Catholic Church in your town is Queen of the Rosary, Queen of Angels, Queen of Patriarchs, Queen of Martyrs, Queen of Confessors, Queen of Virgins, Queen of All Saints, Queen of Peace, right? These are the names of Catholic churches, all because she's the queen. And that revelation, right? She's clothed with the sun, and the 12 stars are on her head, and the moon is under her feet. Like she is lofty and exalted. But these are like these pictures of Mary that come way after the fact. What do we actually see about Mary? So if you've got a Bible, let's look at Luke. Let's see some stuff here. And even before we get into Mary, we got to stop and remember when we get introduced to Mary in this particular story in chapter 1, verse 26, we're going to see that somebody's coming to her. So we got to look at this guy too, right? Gabriel. So in the 6th month, God sent his angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee. That line by itself is already a lot, isn't it? So yeah. What do you see here? God sending an angel named Gabriel to Nazareth in Galilee. Anything grab you in that sentence? Like, what do we need to find out? What are the things we would want to ask ourselves from this? Because you're doing a study, right? You're not just reading, you're studying, you're thinking. What are you gonna ask yourself here?
What's the message?
What did Gabriel look like?
I love it. That was like 7 different answers at the same time.
Prophecy fulfillment.
Prophecy fulfillment. Okay. I heard that. I heard somebody said, what's a messenger?
Yeah. God sent his messenger because they didn't believe.
Right.
So,
all right.
I mean, hey, come on, y'all. Get on the bandwagon here now.
Okay. Yep. So you're sending a messenger. It's a prophecy. Who's the messenger?
Gabriel.
Gabriel. Okay. Do we know anything about Gabriel?
Not just any angel.
Not just any angel, right? Although it doesn't say anything special. It just said he sent the angel, right? It doesn't call him an archangel here or anything like that. In the Bible, he's not called an archangel, at least in our canon.
Well, then you keep running downstairs. I gotta get dressed.
Karen, you're
Somebody's
on.
gotta get-
You're not on mute, Karen. I guess we can mute her. Or yeah, maybe Travis can. So she doesn't say anything to her son that we don't need to hear. So let's wrestle with this guy, this angel named Gabriel. What do you know about him?
He's like the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a great analogy. Okay. Secretary of State. Tell me, make the connection for me.
He confers with other high powers worldwide. Official story.
Okay. All right. So he's able to make he kind of stands in for the president or she in all these other world powers. Yep.
He's powerful.
All right.
He can close the mouth of a holy guy.
He can close the mouth of a holy guy.
Yeah.
Tell me what does that mean?
Wasn't it Zechariah who was hearing about he was going to have a baby and had some questions, and Gabriel says, "Zip it."
Okay. Excellent. So he's powerful. All right. Well, do we know Gabriel from anything other than this story in Luke 2?
Enoch.
We do know him from Enoch. Good. So we're making some connections here. What do we know about him from Enoch?
He's one of the angels that was called to round up the angels that had been mingling with the daughters of men.
The Nephilian, yeah.
He's one of those major angels there with Raphael and Michael and all of those guys. And in Second Enoch, which I doubt anybody really reads that, but Second Enoch, he is the one who gets seated at the left hand of God.
Yeah.
And is in charge of paradise and set over all the quote powers. And powers is usually a name for other spiritual beings. So that's some serious. Now remember, Second Enoch is not canonical, so we don't think it's inspired if you're holding to those 66 books or even more of them. Enoch doesn't show up in any of the canons. But it gives you an idea of what people think about Enoch at this time. He's also called an archangel in some of these Second Temple books, just like Michael is called an archangel. He intercedes for the earth. Sometimes God's not very happy with the earth and he intercedes, and he's charged to go in to proceed against the reprobates and to destroy the bad ones. Let's see here. What else do I find? He's tasked with throwing the wicked into a furnace on the day of judgment. His name is engraved on shields and towers in some of the Qumran scrolls in preparation for a final battle. Like Gabriel is, anybody remember, I think I've talked about this before. Do you anybody remember Frank Peretti's ridiculously fun story about spiritual powers, piercing the darkness in this present darkness? You guys remember that, Randall? All right, he's the only one. Yeah, it was super fun and super ridiculous. But whatever. It was fun. But the angels in there are like man's man, right? Like, their arms are bigger than my legs. They got swords and shields, and they're just like right. They're warriors. Gabriel seems to fit this bill, right? He's a major player in this. Some people think he's the one in Daniel who is with Michael when Michael fights against the Prince of Persia. It just mentions an angel in that spot, but the only angel mentioned in Daniel earlier is Gabriel in chapter 9. So maybe it's Gabriel and Michael that are going and doing battle, I guess. Anyway, he's like a major player. Okay, he's somebody you don't mess with. So, all right, back to my original story. If you were here when we started off, I was telling the story and I said, this is the way I would do it, but this story that the Bible's doing is nothing like what I would do. But this part is exactly what I would do, right? Because we got this super warrior with a flaming sword, I'm assuming. I don't know. It's a lightsaber, maybe. He's a ninja warrior kind of thing, and he's ready. He's attacking. So But, and we know we need somebody like Gabriel, because if this story is as big as we think it's going to be, and we all know it is because we've already read the story, right? Then we know there's got to be some major opposition coming in the story. So we're going to need somebody like Gabriel. So here comes Gabriel into the story. And think about Revelation 12 again. We did that last year, a few of you at least. I don't think any CGI things could make Revelation 12 really come to life the way it is, with Mary clothed with the sun, and here comes Gabriel. Like, it's going to be great. All right, but Revelation 12, put it back into your memory. An enormous red dragon. Remember this? Red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his head, and his tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. And the dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour the child the moment it was born. That's the kind of story I like. All right, this is a warrior story, and we need someone like Gabriel, because we got this mega dragon, 7 heads, Percy Jackson kind of story. Those of you guys who read those children's books at some point, YA is all the rage with real adults now. But it's good. But this one here has got all these heads, but also 10 horns and 7 crowns. So power, just showing all this power and royalty. And this dragon is there to make sure that this child doesn't grow up, nothing happen, like that he's not who everyone says that he is. And when you got this kind of opposition, you're going to need somebody like Gabriel. So here comes Gabriel with his, I assume, 8-pack abs, spinning a sword like Aragorn, and cleaving an axe like Gimli, and shooting arrows like Legolas, just to give you the movie connections. All right, so you got the epic drama of all the things that's happening. All right, this is Legolas, Gimli, and Aragorn all combined into one. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then for crying out loud, read Tolkien at some point. All right, or watch the movie if you have to. Anyway, so back to the biblical story, though, right? That's what I want. This is how we see Gabriel, but this version doesn't tell us anything about all that stuff. Okay, in the 6th month, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee. All right, so we know who the angel is. We don't know, haven't really talked about Mary yet, except for in our imagination, the later Catholic imagination. But what about this place? What do we know about this place that he's going to Nazareth, a town in Galilee?
It's very small.
Very small, right? This is kind of the Poolsville of Washington, D.C. I'm saying that just for Lori. Who else? Does anybody else know Poolsville in here? Riston does. All right. So we lived in Poolsville together for some time. Not together, but in the same town. You know what I'm saying? All right. Anyway, so it's very, very tiny, 5,000 people. There's, I don't know how many people are in Nazareth, but it's nothing. So again, not the kind of story, right? Roman garrison. What is that for? Got to speak. I see it.
Nazareth, I think.
Oh yeah, there for sure. Yep. Rome is going to be heavily infiltrate. I mean, they're going to be all over this point. So I don't know if there's an actual like an outpost or anything there, but there probably is. But again, this isn't what I would think it should be, right? This is not New York City. This is not LA. This is not DC. I don't know what your big places are, but that's not this. So I would think, even in their context, I would think it would be something like Jerusalem, right? If you're going to tell a story and you're going to enter it, there's going to be a king brought into this. Jerusalem is the place to go. But we're going to Nazareth.
Okay, aren't there people that say, isn't he out of Nazareth? Who is he?
Yeah, right. Like nothing good comes out of Nazareth, right? This is like, we know he can't be the guy because he comes from Nazareth. Like, it's that simple. Nobody good would come out of there. All right. So it's only after that we get to, in verse 26, now who is he going to? He's going to Mary. So what do we know about Mary? Verse 28 tells us a bunch of stuff. Let's see here. If anybody's got it, you can just read it. Luke 1:28.
And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. Is this the right place?
That's exactly the right place. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So we know. So, and I told you to read 28, but right before that, right, it said there was a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, and the virgin's name was Mary. So, and right after where you stopped is where Gabriel has to say, "Don't be afraid," right? Which makes sense because whenever angels show up, they come. You know, there's messenger angels that come, and they're just like they look like regular people, but there's also angels that come that seem to have the power of God with them. Like, and whenever that happens, people are afraid. In fact, in academic circles, they'd often say that these stories were changed, these angel stories, that they were originally God stories, but that the theology of the time was moving in a direction. You don't have to believe this or not, but it was moving in a direction that people couldn't see God. And so you'll remember that there's verses in the Old Testament that say you can't see God and live. And that theology was starting to take hold in their minds. So these stories that were God stories in the Old Testament and even a little in the New became angel stories. But even the angel stories that are connected, they're so connected to God that there's fear in it, but they still survive. Okay, so what do we know about her? We know she's a virgin in verse 27, so pledged to be married.
She's young.
She's young, right? Yep. Because in this culture, once you're a woman, you're married. Okay, pretty much everybody's married when they're grown. So she's young. We know that. We know she's never known a man, just in case there's any kind of concern about what the word virgin means in this case. Because remember Isaiah 7:14, where that's the sign, the virgin shall conceive and bear a child, and they shall call his name Emmanuel. That word Alma doesn't mean virgin, it means young woman. Right? So Luke is grabbing hold of that, but he's using a different word, parthenos in Greek, and which means a woman who's never been with a man. It means like actual virgin, not just young woman. And then Luke will repeat it and say a virgin who had never been with a man. Just in case you weren't sure what the word means, we're just clarifying that's what it means here. Okay, so Luke is doing something really awesome. He's changing the Isaiah 7 passage to have more power. So remember Isaiah 7 is not a prophecy, right?
Right.
Let's go ahead and make sure everybody's on board with that. Isaiah 7:14 is not a prophecy.
Are you for real?
Yeah, not a prophecy. It is a present day thing that takes place during Isaiah's time, or at least during the character Isaiah in the text, the author Isaiah versus the character Isaiah. And it says a virgin has conceived or will conceive. It's hard to figure out the grammar there in Hebrew, and academics are different. But whatever the case, she conceives. And it wasn't some miracle back then. It was happening right then or had just happened. Whatever.
So Matthew would have gotten a D in a seminary class, right?
Yes. Yeah. And yep, for sure. He's doing some weird historical grammatical stuff. He's not doing historical grammatical stuff. That's all. He's doing allegory. He's playing. I would call it typology, right? The type. He's grabbing hold of the Old Testament. He's bringing it in. So, again, that's another Isaiah 7:4. If you want to talk about that, we could talk about that sometime too, or you can just ask questions and whenever you're ready. But that's a different subject. All right, so we got this young woman, and again, young woman, not the queen, standing there with the pomp and circumstance, just this very young woman. And the traditions that come after this say that she's 12 years old. Now, these are fictional stories. And when I say stories, I only know of one, so I should back up. There's a fictional story about her being 12 that we have no idea how old she was, right? But this is the culture of that time, would be for a young woman to be betrothed to a man. And it would be pretty early in her teen years. Okay, so it could have been, she could have been a tween, right? But whatever the case, we're talking about somebody who is very young. Somebody that doesn't come from any pedigree. Notice that her parents are not mentioned in this. That's significant. Some academics would say because they're not mentioned, that she must be an orphan. She must not have parents in this story. There's no reason to think one way or the other about that. But the point is that they're not giving her any kind of heightened status in the story. So
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I could absolutely be wrong, but I thought there was two varying stories coming from the line of David, and Luke tells one and somebody else tells another. I thought Luke's traced it through Mary's side. So that would give her, a little more status than Mary from Charlotte,
Yeah, that is a common understanding. And what that is an apologetic move.
Okay.
Because what we want to do is defend the inerrancy of Scripture. And in order to defend the inerrancy of Scripture, we have to have one come from Mary and one come from Joseph.
Okay.
But that's actually not how they're laid out. It doesn't say that. So that's just a way for us to go, hey, we got two different stories here. It's two different genealogies. What do we do about that? And at least
How
you've
do we-
heard from me.
How do we know
Maria.
it's made up and not passed down? Like, do we know it's made up and not passed down
No.
orally?
I wasn't saying it's made up. I'm just saying that there are two different traditions to her genealogy, or to the genealogy of Jesus, rather.
Okay.
Right. And you generally give genealogies of the dad, not the mom. That's just norm. Sorry, ladies, you're not important in this time period.
Matthew
Luke was a
named a few.
physician. Luke was a physician. He's following the bloodline. He's Greek too. So just say,
yeah. I've read all those apologetic arguments. I think they fail. I just
okay.
But it's fine. It doesn't change anything for me. Like let's just say one is Mary and one is Joseph, and that's perfectly fine. Just remember what I always try to push on you, which is again my bias, right? Hopefully you're listening to me, I've got biases too. But I don't think the Bible speaks univocally. So I don't think it's designed to do that, and I think it actually hurts the intention of the story when we do that, when we force it to fit into that mold. So I'm okay with there being different traditions, just like Judas dies in two different ways. That doesn't bother me at all. Just like there's more than one trek way for people to get from Egypt to the land of Canaan. There are a million different stories. Like how does Saul become king? There's two different stories back to back in there. There's two different creation stories. I don't think they have to be harmonized, and I think when we harmonize them, we do damage to what the point of them is. So I hope that comes out regularly, like almost every week.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Isn't Mary Jewish?
Shut up, Jace. Yes, we got what you're saying. Don't believe that the Bible's from God. No, I do. I do believe it's from God. But God uses imperfect people to tell his story and is perfectly fine with lots of traditions.
Isn't Mary's Jewishness due to her mother's side?
Again, that is something that is a present day thing. Yeah. That we trace the Judaism through the mother. But yeah, at that point in time, they would have traced it through the father is the more important person in their time.
Oh.
And Joseph and Mary are both Jews, so that's fine too. So I know that you can find some commentaries that are going to disagree with me on this, and that one will be Mary and one will be Joseph. I am perfectly fine with that. That doesn't take away from my story at all. The point here that I'm trying to make, at least, is that neither Mary nor Joseph, we haven't talked about Joseph yet, but Mary has no pedigree, right? Nobody that, even if you see that as her genealogy, right? We don't know who these people are. Like there's nothing contrasted with Zechariah, right? In the same story, the Zechariah Elizabeth story, where we hear so much about how important they are and how, but that's a different story. That's John's story, right? And this is Jesus's story, and there's nothing going on here. But basically, in the story, Mary's not worth a memory at this point. Now she's going to be, right? We're gonna hear some stuff about Mary later on. The only thing good about Mary at this point that we know of is she's highly favored, and an angel came to her and said she's going to have have a son. Like, that's pretty significant. So she is worthy of honor. Don't get me wrong. But the story is trying to say she's worthy of honor from a very low and humble state. That low, humble people can also be very important in the eyes of God, which is also a pretty consistent biblical theme, right? You know, who's going to be the king? Oh, I've got one other son he's out there with his sheep, but you don't want him, right? No, that's the one I want, right? It's always the lowly seem to be the ones.
But
right.
I mean, going to Joseph, wasn't he fairly well off and had several wives and took Mary out of, he was saddened by her state and that no one else wanted her, and so he took her as yet another wife?
I've never heard that story.
Oh, okay. I've heard that through, kind of the Aramaic and Greek translations. People that do those translations have found
there's definitely nothing
like
there's nothing in the Greek that makes us think that. There's nothing in the actual text.
Joseph took pity on her? No, nothing.
No, I mean,
Okay.
it does say that he wanted to divorce her, right, or to let her go, and that instead the angel said, "Take her anyway," and so he did.
Okay.
But we don't have anything about him taking pity on her. As far as we know, it might be a decent love story. I don't know. I mean, the reality in those cultures was it usually wasn't about love. It was some kind of an arranged marriage from an older man, not older like an old man, but somebody who's older than her at least, and would take her to continue the line. So, but there's nothing about in the story, at least, about him taking pity on it that I remember.
Right. I don't find it in here, but I don't read Aramaic at all. And the Greek is beyond. I haven't studied it, so okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So if you're reading something, so there's no New Testament stuff that's in Aramaic. So there's Aramaic verses or chapters in the Old Testament, but none in the New Testament. There are Aramaic words here and there, but we assume that Jesus spoke in Aramaic. Okay, that's an assumption. It's a pretty decent assumption, I think, but because that was what people spoke. But that's not what is being recorded. So the text is written totally in Greek. So I don't know where. I think probably what someone's doing is taking the Greek, saying, well, if this was originally in Aramaic, and then they're going backwards and trying to determine something based on that. But it was never in Aramaic. Like, nobody is quoting Jesus, probably. That's probably a good academic thing to remind everybody of, right? There's no such thing as the red letters. Like, there was no red letter version of the Bible back then. That's a new thing, too. So we don't have any of Jesus's words, none of them. All we have is Mark, Matthew, Luke, John's versions of what Jesus said, which differ from each other constantly.
Are you saying that historically there was no color red back in the ancient Near East?
Thanks, Randall. That's exactly what I was saying. Yep. No color red. Yep. All right. I like that you bring us back to the real important things. That's very helpful to me. All right, here's what I was trying to get across with all of my all over the place ADD, apparently, but it's you guys' fault, not mine. This Christmas conspiracy kind of thing, that God seems to be conspiring against the way that I would tell this story. Like, he wants to make sure that nobody later on is going to tell a story that is high and lofty and built up. Like, he wants to destroy Christmas. Okay, and so it's not it's not Satan that's trying to destroy Christmas. It's God. Like, I don't want that kind of a Christmas story. I've got a whole other one that I want to get in there. So, and he's gonna do it. So he's writing. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. So God's story is backwards. He's gonna do this whole thing backwards. I know that. I don't know if any of you have read this. You guys like Max Lucado? Anybody? Lucado? I don't know how to say his name.
I've read him.
I didn't catch that. You were too broken up. Sorry, Fran.
I said I have read him.
Yeah. I find his stories delightful. I think they're a blast to read. I think they're fictional, they're fun, they're helpful in thinking things through. He has a book on Christmas. I don't know what the name of it is. I read it a long time ago, but it tells the story of the angels coming to Earth, and they're coming from, I have no idea where, because they, like, one chapter is them just going through space to get like around Jupiter and around Venus. And it's super fun and absolutely ridiculous. So when you think about angels coming to Earth, or Jesus coming to Earth, or anything coming to Earth, you need to understand we're not talking about something that's far away that gets closer. About two different ways to see the world, both present at the same time, but we aren't aware of them. And sometimes we are, because they appear here. Okay, so there's these two worlds that are connected and interlock and overlap. Okay, so that's what's going on here. We've got this angel that appears, right? And he comes to this virgin, and no queen, no super special, but God has set this up. He plans Mary. He plans a Christmas story that's going to be a blip on the world. Like, it's going to be nothing memorable. Like, he's setting Christmas up to fail, because that is what the story is going to be about, right? A complete failure. And you guys know where this is leading to, so you know it's not a complete failure. But the storyline is taking us. There's nothing that's happening here. This is not good. So, but she is marrying somebody. Joseph's from a good background, so that's good. And she's pledged to be married. He's a descendant of David, right? All that stuff. So that's really good. So what do we know about Joseph other than what Steve has started us with?
Kind.
Say that again.
Kind.
He's kind. Okay. Yeah. Because of the story we just told, right? Where he takes her anyway. Yeah. We see that. I mean, he's not a king, right? He's a what?
He's a carpenter.
He's a carpenter. Okay. And that word is oh, good grief. It's tecton. Doesn't matter what it is, because it's probably wrong. And it means, like, we always say carpenter, but really it's a builder. It's a mason, an artisan, somebody who crafts things, who makes things, right? That's what he is. So yeah, he may have worked with wood, but he also would have worked with lots of other things, brick and whatever else.
So he would have been like a blue collar worker, not
he would. Yep. That's exactly right. And so, like, I know that Dominic Crossan says that Jesus would have followed in that same trade. That was the family trade. But also that Joseph probably never adopted Jesus. This is what he says. I don't know if that's true. And if that's the case, then even Jesus would have had no status and probably couldn't get a decent job doing much of anything. So, but either way, right, whether he's adopted and just followed in his dad's footsteps, or whether he was never adopted, couldn't get a job, point is that, like, he's pretty lowly too, but Joseph is very lowly.
So did they have adoption back then?
Yeah, they would have brought him in. Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
Like they just would have taken him into the family and made him.
It would have been official, like he would have been an heir.
Oh, okay.
In fact, Paul will play with that idea about becoming heir, right? The adoption idea.
Okay.
So important. We move from slaves to adoption. Like, that's all of us, Gentiles, right?
Right.
We get adopted in. All right, so we know that Matthew is kind. We know that he's not a king. We know that he, it seems like a pretty decent guy, but a lowly guy, an artisan of some kind. We know he's righteous, which would have made him a man of renown if he had some kind of status, but he doesn't. So nobody knows who he is, probably. And I think Lori earlier said something, right? That who is this guy, right? Like, he's a nobody. Oh no, she was talking about something else. But there is that verse in there that says, "Isn't this Jesus who's the son of the carpenter?" Like, isn't this that nobody that we all know? Like, I mean, we know him because he's in town, but he's nobody. He's just the guy. So again, God doesn't seem like the best way to do this. Okay, we have no real players in this. These are all kind of losers. If you want to make Christmas count, you probably need to pick some different people out. Way to make sure Christ stays in Christmas, God. This is not going to happen the way you tell in the story here. So, yeah, I don't think he could have picked lower class people to do this job. All right, so
It wasn't the line of David,
he was in the line of David. That's true. Yep,
but that was probably a lot of people.
that's a lot of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And by the way, that cool little story that we all know about. Wait, I don't know if I really want to. No, that's too much. Let's not do that right now. I don't want to mess you guys up too much. Whenever I always have to find that balance between telling you what academics believe, and I don't care whether you believe them or not. And also, when I say academics, it's not like every single academic. There's obviously always debate in there, but there's generally a consensus for things. So, for instance, stories in Luke 1 and Luke 2, if they're both historically accurate, we've got some problems in that story. So, like Herod and Quirinius, those kinds of things, they don't co-event, right? They can't happen at the same time. So there's something wrong on these, but you're not supposed to take them like they're rigid. Okay, these are stories that we're trying to get across something to you. Okay, and it doesn't matter whether it all is like jives just perfectly. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, that's not what the Bible's designed to do. So I was just trying to think of another one of those things is that during that time, probably there would never be a census. First of all, the census doesn't take place till 9 BC, 9 CE. But even if there is, they don't make people go back to their original land, right? That's just not the way that they did it back then. We may find other evidence, I guess, and find out that we're wrong, but that's just not the way you would do it. First of all, because it would destroy the economy if everybody. Anyway, there's lots of stuff going on there, but don't worry about that.
Scholarly consensus usually just ruins the story, dude.
Yeah, it does. I agree, and that's why, like if I were to tell you, like, three wise men are probably right. There's probably not three. They probably weren't wise. Like, there's all these different things to that. That kind of destroys the story. Or if I were to say, they're not in a stable, they're in a house, you kind of destroy the storyline behind it. But the story, even if it's not historically perfect, is still the story that we're supposed to, like, even our mythical story in our minds, right? Even the story you have about December and Joseph on a donkey and coming at the last minute, which, that stuff, it doesn't say all those things. It's a fine story because it's getting across the main point, right? That he's a man out of place, that he's out of time, like he's lowly, he's humble. All that stuff works to tell the story. And that's
what the census works to put them in the right setting, right? I mean, that's part of why that could be in there. Yeah.
Yep.
Hallmark just called and they want to pick a bone with you, Jay.
You're on fire today, Randall. Yes, indeed. They always do. They're calling me every day. It's really annoying. Yes.
We quite often combine the two stories for our Christmas pageants and so forth. And I think that's not that we shouldn't, but I feel like as adults, we never go back and really look at the birth stories in Matthew and Luke. We rely, and this is, I think this is true of a lot of even Old Testament stories that we heard as kids. We hang on to those stories rather than going back and really looking at the text. Yeah. That's just a little sidebar, but yeah.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And we should do that. And we did that with Matthew a couple of years ago. We just did the Matthew story and we left off all the other stuff that's in there. And that's super helpful, right? To know that, that one story has shepherds and angels, and the other story has wise men and camels, right? Or a star, right? And to know that both of those stories are trying to do the same thing, an angel coming to talk to shepherds, a light to the people there, and Matthew, a light to those people. One is trying to stay lowly, one is trying to stay the wealthy from every nation, right? But they're both trying to get across the same idea, right? That the masses are coming, or that not the masses are coming, that's a bad way of saying it, but that they're both trying to get across the herald idea, right? But they're trying to get it across very differently. They're trying to tell the story. One is to the rich and the nations, so it's kind of a David Solomon thing. Like all the people will come and see the wealth of Solomon. That's what's happening in that story. And the other one is we want to keep this a lowly nothing story. But both have lights that bring them or attract them to the child. So yeah, but they're telling different stories, and we need to know that Luke has a different motive than Matthew has in telling the story.
I like Matthew. I pat him on the back for including those marginal women in Jesus' genealogy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the five women. It's beautiful. I have a question with that, because I was actually explaining that a couple days ago, and I looked into it, and Mary. It says Mary is, and I know this is maybe a dumb question, but is Mary? It says that these women aren't Jewish, so it's like Tamar, Ruth. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the other two. Bathsheba. Okay, but then Mary's in there. Mary marries Joseph, because Joseph is from the line of David. But where is Mary? How is Mary? Is Mary Jewish?
Yeah,
that's what I thought. Yeah,
as far as we know.
Okay, then why is she in there? I mean, why is it emphasizing Mary? Because she's not from the line of David.
Why is it in the genealogy in Matthew 1?
Well, no, not why is it in the genealogy? Why it's she's part of the five women. The other women aren't like aren't Jewish per se, right? Am I correct on that?
I think Tamar is.
Okay.
So it's Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. And we assume Bathsheba is Hittite because she's married to Uriah the Hittite. We know Ruth is a Moabitess, and we know that Rahab comes from Canaan before they're conquered. But I think Tamar is Jewish. But the point is that all of these people are outcasts.
Yeah, marginal.
Good. There you go. Yeah.
Well, then how is Mary marginal then? That's, I guess, my question.
Well, I mean, some of the reasons we're given right here. She's not in and of herself, but she's a teenager, or at best, right? So she's definitely not the queen person that we would expect her to be. She's a nobody. So okay. I think she's being compared with these, but also I think there's something also probably sexual being added to this, because all of these people, as I recall, all of them have something in their history that is a sexual story that we're told about, which makes sense because that's what women are for, right? In that world, that's
genealogy.
Yeah, and it's a genealogy, right? Yeah, so they are having, but the stories that we know about each one, right? Tamar being a prostitute on the side of the road when Judah comes by. Rahab leads we think maybe a harlotry house, a whorehouse. Ruth is a Moabitess, and whatever happens on the floor of the threshing floor, lots of scholars would say probably is supposed to be a sexual act there. And who's the other person? Ruth. Bathsheba, right? This famous story of Bathsheba is definitely her rape, and I think it's fair to say that's a rape, but because superior to inferior, but whatever. That act of sexuality, all of those. So Mary is being told very quickly here that she's a virgin, right? So it's adding in the sexual part to that too. And it's the opposite, right? She's never had sex. So I think it's kind of a cool way of telling the story, if that's Matthew's plan. I don't know. But I don't know if that helps Josh in any way.
No, it does, man. Thanks.
Okay.
But everybody
I think it adds to the lowliness of God's plan to bring redemption to his as lowly children.
Yeah. Yep. And that's what we're trying to talk about, right?
Yeah.
It's the lowly that's in there. And so now we've got this unwed teenage mother almost in a culture that's nothing like ours. Like we even frown upon that still today. It's kind of like, but it's like it's pretty common, to be honest, right? Teenagers get pregnant all the time before marriage. It's pretty normal, and it's not going to change their history. They can recover from that pretty easily, I guess. I'm not trying to say it's not hard or anything like that. Please don't take it wrong. I'm just saying our culture is very different than their culture. They lived in an honor shame culture. And so this would be very dishonoring to the family and much easier for Joseph just to say, let's just let things lie, right? I'm out. I don't need this kind of pressure on me. So, we're going to have this illegitimate kid who's going to be illegitimate forever. And we have a single mom. What are we going to do? What's going to happen here? So not the epic story that we would expect from the way I wrote it from the very beginning with this great king and all that stuff. Again, God seems to be against the Christmas story. It's the worst possible story for the new king. Right? That's what I'm trying to emphasize. And I know you know that, but I'm trying to emphasize it with a little bit more academic throwing stuff in here. So in addition to all that, let's throw into the story the evil, plotting, already king of the Jews, right? Herod, whatever Herod it is, it's one of the Herods, right? So he's trying to kill the kids. Let's throw in a team of soldiers who are bent on destroying all the kids. He's like, they're going around annihilation squads, killing children, and throw in the son of the king once Jesus comes back, who seems to have all the same problems, like the next Herod in line, right? This doesn't get any better. Okay, and those guys are from Matthew, so we're doing exactly what Lori just warned against, right? We're jumping from Luke to Matthew to tell the story. But again, the story, the big picture story is what I'm trying to get. So what about the crowds? In my story, the crowds, we had elephants, carriages, horses, tens of thousands of them, horns blowing, people throwing flowers, right? That's the way it should be, all the pomp and circumstance, fireworks, torches, glory, everything, chariots, ostriches, I don't know, whatever animals are around. And what's the kind of story? What kind of crowds do we see for these?
Few shepherds.
Yes, shepherds. Woo-hoo! Shepherds, the worst of the worst, right? So we got this angel who appears to the shepherds, and shining bright, we're told. And the angel and angels come. They don't sing, by the way. Doesn't say they sing. Lo, we do, but they don't, because they said those things. And they're coming to this lowest class. It's possible for shepherds to own land, but if they own land, they have to work their butts off to keep it. So it's pretty strange. They're dirty, they're nasty, they're low lives. These are I don't know who they are today. I can't even say garbage men anymore. Garbage men are like
they're me, by the way.
Good money.
Yeah,
they're like interns at churches. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what they're like.
Peons, yeah.
Who make no money. They're peons. Yeah. That's our throngs of important people. Myriads of angels rejoicing to this a dozen low life shepherds, probably. And of course, we got this 5-star hotel that they're going to go to, right? That Joseph and Mary are going to go to. It's here in the story. Probably not a stable. I said that already, right? At this point, I'm hoping that you know that we're not talking about like what you see in your, what is that called, a crutch? Is that how you pronounce that word? I've always wondered that. Is that crutch? Is it right? Okay. Creche. Oh, is it C? Oh, it's an SH sound? Creche. Okay. Good to know. Thank you. I will say it right from now on, because once I'm embarrassed about something, I always get it right from now on. All right. So, right, there's no room in the inn is the way we talk about it. That word inn, there in Nazareth, there's probably not an inn. They did have some inns. That was something that was around, but Nazareth has nobody in it. So there's not going to be inns there to begin with. And that word for inn doesn't mean inn, it just means guest room. It means a domicile, a place that you're gonna stay. It could represent an inn, but there's no reason to believe that there's an inn in this particular thing. Bethlehem isn't on any major roads. It's tiny.
I have serious input this time.
Oh, okay.
That Greek word for inn actually happens to be the same Greek word that's used in the passage where it says, I go and prepare a place for you.
Place, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So
place for you to stay. Yep.
Great English inconsistency in how we translate the words.
Yeah. So in the story, if we're going to stick to what the story is trying to say, and that people would go, they visit their families, of course, and we'll assume for the sake of the story that he's going to visit his family, and because that's where his family comes from. They wouldn't have had any place. Somebody else had already booked it, right? Someone, like, lots of people are coming in this story, so there's not a lot of place. So it's not that there isn't. It's not that they wouldn't be hospitable. They would have let them into their house probably, but there's not a lot of room in there. So think about staying over at family, and some of you are
just like
out.
my house right now.
That's right, just like Fran's house.
They call it hotel shelter. Every bed is full, maybe of more than one.
Exactly. So the place is packed. Everyone's there. The culture at that time would have people and animals. In a lot of places, they would be in the same place under the same roof. Some houses were placed against hills, and there would be a cave up against that. That's possible, but either way, they probably would have had some space for animals that would be somewhat separated from the people, but it would probably be in the same house. Maybe it would be downstairs and the people would be on the upstairs. Maybe it would be in a room. The animals would have been off in one room, and then the people would be in another room. But the separation is not going to be huge. But you do want to keep the smell away a little bit, right? So they would have thought about all those things. But
people live like that today. People live like that today, like in South America.
Huh? Okay. I've never been to South America, so yeah. Okay.
Yeah, with their animals in the same building with them, and sometimes running around.
Yep. So there's probably not a stable. They're all together in the same area, and obviously when the baby was born, they probably grabbed a manger, right? Because it would have been nearby. They'd grabbed it. So got to put the kids somewhere. We don't want to lay them on the ground. So let's get them up off the ground a little bit in whatever that manger looked like. And we don't know. Mangers look different in the culture. Manger is just a feeding trough. So it could have been made out of bricks. It could have been made out of wood. We don't know. But whatever the case, they lay in this insanely packed house. So don't think about Joseph and Mary and the little baby that you have in your creche, right? There probably been other people. The other people would have been holding the baby, right? It's a hospitable culture. So whatever the case, it's not a royal birth. So it's not the kind of kingly kind of thing where the dad holds up the child and says, "My son is born!" Ah! And everybody's cheering and blowing horns, and the elephants are all trumpeting. Right? This is not what's happening here. There's just no room, and this baby's born into nothing.
Can I just add too, the whole birth process is messy.
Yeah, that's right.
And nasty. I mean, even in modern day, we can't get away from it, but especially then. Yeah. So that, yeah, we kind of skip over that part, but I'm sure it was uncomfortable and very, messy.
Yep. Especially in a crowd, right? I mean, this would have been a normal process for them that children would be born. They knew how to have babies. But yeah, in this kind of, I mean, you know how hard it is to have a child to begin with. So with this kind of crowd, so many people all around pushing in, that had to been pretty yucky, pretty miserable. Yeah. Definitely not the lavish kinds of things that you ladies did when you had your child with your nice hospital beds and your ice chips from whatever. I'm just kidding. All right. So probably wasn't that pleasant. All right. And then we've got the Herod, right? One of these kings, whoever this is, wanting to worship the child. the king of Israel, who's put on the throne by Caesar Augustus, by the empire, so by the emperor. So King Herod is this is kind of like a symbol king. So he's there to run things for the Caesar. So Herod's a Jew and Caesar is a Roman. And he's, of course, the king of the Jews. So Herod is not real happy to hear, right, that there's going to be a king of the Jews. People come and say, where's the king of the Jews? And he wants to try and find him and kill him. So he sends out his group of ninja warriors. That's what they look like in my mind. It's to kill all the infants around. And just imagine, again, we're just assuming this, the way the story is telling it. We don't have to connect it to reality necessarily, but think about the reality of this, what this would look like, how the story is telling this. If we even talk about one town, let's assume that it's not, empire wide, or even Jerusalem and it's Israel wide, right? Just think about the killing of all the children, like the screams, the blood, the smell that would have been there, the animals and flies and all of these things. That's what you're supposed to be thinking of. Well, you're actually supposed to be thinking of Egypt, right? Pharaoh and what Pharaoh did. This is the new bad guy. Herod is the new Pharaoh, and he's opposed is opposing God. So
the agony of the parents too, losing their children. We just talked about Mary, and I'm on a small group, and we talked about that. Knowing your neighbors and that their children had been killed, and afraid for your child's life anytime.
It's interesting how they were fleeing Egypt, and here they leave and they actually go to Egypt. So it's like this opposite motif. And actually we have life in death to ourselves, or in a spiritual, we have spiritual life and a death to our worldly nature, or whatever you want to say, secular nature. But real quick, I want to add this point. They actually apparently in Ethiopian tradition or legend that they actually fled to Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
Led by the angels. Yeah. This is beautiful. I wouldn't go on a tangent right now, but I can't because we don't have time. But yeah, amazing. Like the Ethiopian church is connected to Solomonic king. I guess Solomon, Queen of Sheba, Ethiopia, went to see Solomon. They had a Menelik, and then the line of kings to Ethiopia. So it's like this huge connection there. It's beautiful. Anyways. Sorry.
They believe it and tell you about it. I've been told it in Ethiopia.
That's very cool. Which is good to remind us of the canon stuff that we're talking about now, how stories change depending on who is receiving them, right? Or how they tell the stories changes over decades or centuries. They grab hold of a story and then they apply it to their particular world. That's a very normal thing, right? That's why we have a Samaritan Pentateuch, which we talked about under the Old Testament canon, right? A Pentateuch, the same 5 books, but not the same 5 books of Torah, right? It tells the story differently in order to get across something different. You might argue that's why we have a Quran too, but we won't get into that one, right? Trying to tell you some of the same stories, but telling it differently with a different son of promise. So
people Gabriel's involved in that too. So
yeah, that's right.
He is. Real quick to add to that, apparently Menelik didn't want to go back empty-handed. So Solomon asked his people in Jerusalem and said, "What should we give him to go back to Ethiopia?" And they said, "Let's give him the Ark of the Covenant with the tablets." And so to this day, and ask him, there's apparently there's a temple where the Ark of the Covenant is, and nobody's allowed to go in there. Okay, it's and people just if you want to have some fun, look up that story.
Okay. I've been there and had it told to me and told where it is, but you can't go see it.
Huh. So they know where it is. That's kind of cool.
They know where it is.
Yeah. In their tradition, they know where it is.
Yeah. But I asked a guy, what does it look like? He said, well, it's just metal frame now is all there is. We don't have any golden wings or anything. We just have the metal frame.
Interesting. I didn't recall that it had a metal frame. I
Well,
recall having a wooden
a
frame.
frame. Maybe he didn't say metal, but just the frame of it. Okay.
Yeah.
No golden wings. I remember.
Yeah,
No cherubim.
and that makes sense.
Was he implying that he had seen it, or that someone who had seen it had told him that?
Are you speaking to me?
Yeah.
Yes. He is saying it's there, and that's what it looks like. Yeah, he'd seen it. He said.
He said he had seen
Yeah,
it.
and
So it wasn't even
yeah,
his
this was up
barely.
this was up where the churches have, were um, built down into a mountain of rock, and they're amazing. Those churches.
They are amazing.
Hmm.
And
It's
what
supposed to be the
country,
New
Fran?
Jerusalem. It's modeled after Jerusalem.
Ethiopia.
Thought so.
It's modeled after it's supposed to be the New Jerusalem, and they were built in like the 12th century in like 1136. And when Israel the fell, this is real Israel, and so this is supposed to be the new Israel. And the king at the time, which his name escapes me, had seen the way to build these churches in a vision. But we're off on a tangent. I'm sorry. I do this sometimes. Sorry.
It's okay. Some tangents are worthwhile and fun to track down. So I'm good with that. In fact, that's pretty much what I do most of this class is get 20 minutes worth of content and then just go off on tangents. That's what I do. Speaking of those 20 minutes of content, I've got like 2 minutes to wrap this up, and we're not going to be able to do that. So I am just going to end this little section and just remind us of where we were before the tangent started. That is, the king is born to the sounds of screaming and lament and misery as these mothers have their children wrenched from them, from their hands. And Joseph, of course, is going to take his family and run away to protect the child and his family. And now what we have is a story about the king that is going to come and rule the world living in hiding, which again is this weird way to do the story. If I were God, this is not the way I would do it. They're in Egypt trying to get safe, which is exactly what happens in Pentateuch as well, right? The story of Jacob going to Egypt to become safe is a good thing. And then it becomes a bad thing later on, but it's a good thing that they're rescued in Egypt. And just to make matters worse, when they come back, right, we have a new Herod. So the evil King Herod is dead, but they finally come back to find out that Herod's son is in charge. And according to Matthew, he's going to probably do the same thing. Like he's still a mess. So they go again, and this is the way you've got to try and make it work. They go to Nazareth. So that's that side of the story. Really, one is a Nazareth story, one's a Bethlehem. Anyway, really what the story is trying to do is make sure that you know he was born in Bethlehem when he probably when he probably wasn't. But that because what we're trying to do is make him connect to the Old Testament stories. Okay, there's no anyway, yeah. I don't know how much to say with all the critical stuff. So let me say again in my last minute, because I feel like I said a lot of things in here that I might not have. I might have been pushing things for some of you. So when we talk about academic consensus, we're talking about people who don't care whether the story is true or false, who some have faith and some don't. They're just trying to be honest with the story and with what could have happened in history, and they could absolutely be wrong. Okay, but my commitment to you is to try and let you know what is being said in that world. Okay, and you can say, "Hey, that's ridiculous. Of course, he was born in Bethlehem. It has to be because the prophecy said that." That's fine. Like that's perfectly fine. That's the way the story wants you to understand it. Okay, so the Bible is saying that, or at least some portion of the Bible is saying that. You've just got to determine whether that's the point of the text, right? Because equally good is whether it happened in history or whether it happens in story. The point is to tell you that he is the son of promise, right? That Jesus is the king who has come. That's what the story is trying to get across. Okay, whether the prophecy is so direct is a different question. it might be that the story takes place here, and then there's this story that's here, and the author of the New Testament is going back and grabbing hold of these things and applying it here. Does that make sense? That might bother you, especially if you are a conservative fundamentalist, if you grew up in the same world that I grew up in. That would have bothered me a lot 20 years ago. So that's okay for it to bother you. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's what learning is all about, right? Sometimes things got to upset you a little bit for you to take a little tiny step forward and go, I wonder if. In fact, I think God wants us to challenge him. I think that's actually part of what it means to be part of the new Israel, right? Wrestles with God is what Israel means. And I think this text is living because it is begging you to wrestle with it. It doesn't want to give you like perfect answers. It's telling you the story through all these genres and other different ways of understanding things. And it wants you in community of 20 other people to wrestle and think through these kinds of things and not to just dismiss those crazy academics or those crazy fundamentalists, right? And most of us are somewhere in between those crazies, and we're all part of our own crazy, but we're just trying to wrestle with these things and learn a little bit and move forward. But you see what the story is trying to do, right? And we'll continue this, but it's trying to point to this child of lowly birth who is the king. That is what the story is grabbing hold of. And that part, I mean, all of this is true, but that's what resonates with me, at least. And where we'll go when we apply all of this stuff is to think about this reversal, this absolute reversal of the Christmas story, that it's nothing like what we would expect, and it's everything that's included that the kingdom is. Right. So whenever you think, we should get this, I deserve this, like we're reading the Christmas story all wrong, right? We're reading the whole gospel story wrong. The story is designed to turn everything on its head. And so I think the Bible actually speaks almost in a rebuke to people like me, like us sometimes, because we don't like to have our rights taken from us. And this is all about that. In fact, the Magnificat, where Mary is going to sing this song, right, about, well, you just read the Magnificat sometime in Luke, right? It's all about a reversal of fortunes. It's a beautiful song. It's based on Hannah's song, probably, maybe Miriam's, everything turning upside down. And it's incredible. All right, well, I've got like 3 or 4 more pages. They're mostly application kinds of things, but I'd love to do it. Like, I'd like to have the conversation with you about application. And there's a little bit more about, the people involved in all of this, but let's talk about it next week a little bit more. And I probably won't do the week after that because it's like the Tuesday right after Christmas. You'll probably have family in, whatever, you'll want to relax that Tuesday night. So we'll probably skip that one, but I'll try to be here next week, at least for some time. And we'll talk about Christmas some more. Sorry, it's 9:20. Let's cut this thing and we can keep talking if you want, but Travis, let us stop recording now, sir, before we say anything.